now we come into the question of reproduction.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We had another question here, because we all understood the word arcade in the Benjamin world, which I would translate with Bogen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
I explained it right.
Yeah. But it isn't, like in German you say Arcade. Die Arcade.
Ja. Aber es ist ja eher architektonisch und der Bogen ist...
Yeah, but yeah, it's good. Es ist ein Bogen. It's nice because the Bogen has in English, in German, the other one like an arrow and the Bogen. Der Bogen.
Aber es ist auch ein Bogenschlagen.
Und ein Bogenschlag zwischen, ja, absolut. Wobei, no, it's in English, but whereas you're absolutely right, but the term arcade that Benjamin uses, I think specifically uses the term arcade architectonically, linking to the glass arcades.
He uses Bogen.
No.
He takes arcade.
Arcade.
Okay, yes.
He uses arcade. And it was, in parallel, Benjamin started working on glass architecture in Paris, the Passage, and speaking about the glass arcades. So I think it's the term of arcade. Bogen is a wonderful translation. Okay, so we spoke about, in fact, think of this zero movement. Klee called the point the zero movement. And in fact, we've been talking about the movement all the time, although talking about the still, but movement like a tangent within the movement and so on. So, and then last, what I said is that this may sound a little awkward, but this in fact is exactly the movement also entailed in technical reproduction. So now the last part is about the question of reproduction and punctum. So reproduction is, as we all know, so speaking about the reproduction that Benjamin speaks about. So mostly then referring to Benjamin's work on the work of art in the age of the technical reproducibility. Reproduction is related to the event of the gesture, the tone, the artwork in its uniqueness, the deferral, or, of course, the extinguished light in photography. And what took place in light, what took place in photography was, of course, light. Reproduction is related to the take and its presentation in different dimensions via carrier and technical equipment. Benjamin's technical reproducibility must be thought of as something other than duplication and the loss of what he calls the cultic uniqueness. The moment of the unique, the singular, that is lost in every reproduction or repetition, in fact, in every mimesis, only emerges as that very loss. That is to say, and I refer to, this is someone who was teaching me as well, Sam Weber, who made a brilliant Benjamin book, and one of the only one, I think, who did a complete different reading from Benjamin's book of reproducibility. That is to say, reproduction is a double movement. Singularity is not just withdrawn from the so-called original or from what is reproduced, but from the moment it is established in that withdrawal as a third. Reproduction is a double movement. Singularity is not just withdrawn from what is reproduced or from the original, but from the moment of this very reproduction or this withdrawal, it is established in its own withdrawal as the third. So, I think I explained this. And, so what you have to think is that if you consider whatever an original is to be one thing and to be reproduced, and you consider the space, how small ever it may be, as the space in between. And then you do not consider the reproduction to be the reproduction, nor the original to be the original, but the third, what houses exactly in between both, and what is withdrawn from the original by being reproduced, to be the third in between. And you may think of that this third then, in Benjamin's sense, is the original to come. We come back to this later, so it gets too complicated. So reproduction, and this we certainly all agree, presents us with the loss, preserving in the loss, the singularity of what was withdrawn. And by this, it creates a third. This is somehow what Panofsky, to explain where this comes from now, in the 20s of the 20th century, there was a very strange story in Lübeck, at the cathedral of Lübeck, where the former director of the museum, Heise, in the 20s wanted to put copies of sacred statues into the church, and was heavily criticized for this, because it was said it was a blasphemy not to have the originals in the church of these statues, marine statues. And by this, his sacrilege, a huge debate started in Germany in the 20s, which later was called the so-called facsimile debate. Before, this was many years before Benjamin wrote his essay. And many, about 10 art historians at that time reacted within this debate. And they all focused on photography, because photography being the medium of reproduction, like the mold, or the blast mold for statue. And almost all of them severely went against the museum director, saying you cannot do this. You cannot put a reproduction in a sacred space. You know, today we laugh at this because we barely have originals in sacred space. Even the relics are not original, well, they have not been, so it doesn't matter. But one who came out of the Warburg school is Panofsky. He reacted differently. He was favoring this act, and I'll tell you why. So this is what Panofsky stated in the 20s in an article favoring the technical reproduction by photography, saying that the reproduction carries the reproduced into, in the words of Panofsky, into a sphere of principal otherness. So, reproduction carries the reproduced into a sphere of principal otherness. This is, of course, really interesting, and it was written about 10 years before Benjamin. Nobody knows if Benjamin ever read this. But we know philologically that Benjamin tried everything to become a member of the Warburg School, but they didn't accept him. It is in the logic of photography to portray even its own temporal distance from the moment of its temporal or chronoscopic representation. Photography, as we know, is confronted with a desire to reproduce a time, to restore a time. Yet, as a reproduction, the photographic image shows the loss of something that never attained itself as present. This displacement of what is presumed to be present, there would be no photography without this presumption, resembles the postponement, the endless prolongation of the loss. As Jacques Derrida about différence wrote, in every exposition, the différence, postponement, would be exposed to a disappearing as a disappearance. So every appearance is a disappearance. In photography, as we know by Barthes, and we know by ourselves, everything always has already happened. Will always have already happened. In his Camera Lucida, Barthes writes that the continuous catastrophe of photography puts death in the future perfect. Thus, reproduction might also be conceived of as the gift of death. But who perceives this gift? How is one to perceive one's own death? As an act, se donner la mort. What duplication strategies are required in order to be able to have already experienced that already at a given moment? To be able to divide the moment. This is, as you may recall, the quote by Derrida, "I'm already dead," signifies that I'm behind. In an early text by the French author and photographer Hervé Guibert, does this sound to you? Probably not. I don't even know if it has ever been translated. Hervé Guibert was a very young critique of photography in Le Monde in France in the 80s. An interesting writer, and he died very young by AIDS, at the age of, I think, 28, 27, 28. And knowing that he had AIDS, he wrote an enormous amount of books, novels, and extraordinarily good novels. Not all of them, most of them. And he wrote every novel in the stress of time, knowing that he would die. And at the end, he couldn't write anymore. But he convinced then the cinema, the TV chain Antenne 2, to give him cameras and a team, and they filmed the last month of him and his death because he couldn't write. So, Hervé Guibert, in an early text by the French author and photographer Hervé Guibert, which was called La Mort Propagande, so the propaganda death, from 1976, we read of the longing for the ultimate, forever incomprehensible reproduction. The reproduction of the ecstatic body onto death. The most extreme transposition, translation, the most extreme disguise. I quote Hubertus, there's a tendency to suffocate death, censor it, drown it and disinfect it, asphyxiate it in ice. I would like death to raise its powerful voice and sing diva through my body, not to let this source of direct visceral spectacles dry up, to take my life on stage in front of cameras, to give this extreme, excessive performance of my body in my death. End of quote. In all the classical texts on photography, one is repeatedly confronted with the motive of the revenant, the spirit, the doppelganger, the double, used to designate the uncanny, the dreamlike or traumatic presence of a present that is either long since or only recently past. Suddenly, our gazes may then betray perplexity, restlessness, and the fact that, like wandering spirits, these people, the revenants in the photographs, are granted no rest, that their fate is to have to endure our gaze and lament in an undying echo. That moment of photographic closing that separates the pose from any future opens up the moment of inexhaustible alterity, with no prospect of an end, nor of salvation. Like, I remember Lyotard, imaginer un suspense sans attente particulière, imagine a suspense without particular expectation. Herein lies the allegorical capacity of photography. In the temporal seclusion of the exposition and its finiteness, it literally ruins any thought of a present, establishing every moment in difference. Here, just as in the impossible performative, the enunciation foreclose, which Roland Barthes analyzed in Poe's novel The Facts in the Case of Mr. Valdemar. You know the novel? You have to read it. It's one of the most famous novels of Edgar Allan Poe. The Facts in the Case of Mr. Valdemar is this guy who has, one as Poe himself, had the biggest fear of getting buried alive. And in fact he gets buried alive. We don't know alive now, but he gets buried alive. Yes. But then I tell you, here, just as in the impossible performative, the enunciation foreclose, which Roland Barthes analyzed in Poe's Effects in the Case of Mr. Valdemar, the statement, I am dead, which Valdemar makes in the novel, contains the metaphorical significance of photography as a present that is past, but continually emanating from out of death. I am dead is not really, as Barthes says, an incredible statement. It is much more radical. It is the impossible statement. It is the paroxysm of transgression, or the blind spot in language. And it is exactly here where the third hides, or is. And this is, I don't know, I thought it was going on, but this is where it's finished. In here. So you have these of course, the third intimately is linked to death. Not if we think the third in relation to Barthes. This is where it came up, is the death of his mother. If we think the third in relation to reproduction, this is how we always think that once the original is gone, once it has been reproduced. If we think it in relation to translation, it shifts. And this is where we have to go to with Echo. Whereas there it's linked to death as well. But because Benjamin, in the task of the translator, to resume the task of the translator, at a certain moment says, after the forest of language, after the tangent, so describing the act of translation, says that the translated text, or we may think of the reproduced as well, photography, the translated text is not in the shadow of the original, as one might think, but it is the translated text that brings us towards the original, which is the future. So there, in Benjamin's theory of translation, the original is the third. They both link the act of translation, which from the act of translation emanates the original. There's a messianic side to it, which was the most important for Benjamin, of course. That someday, so the Messias is in the future. It's not the Jesus behind, the dead Jesus. So this is, of course, something specific reading, the first reading. But there are other readings of Benjamin which bring the original, or like in photography, although having been in the state of a becoming in the future. Yeah. Okay, so this is the let's say this is the basis now. We can construct upon or build.
Can I refer to something that you just finished saying?
Yeah.
You reminded me of that story by Borges, Pierre Menard, author of Photography, with the word-for-word translation. Yeah. And the narrator, Borges or whoever, praises the translation because it seems to him an improvement upon the original. It brings Quixote to life, and it inserts it into the 20th century of Julian pragmatism and so on and so forth. Would you say that there's an echo in Borges of what you just said about Benjamin's idea? Or are we looking at something different?
No, I think we're looking at something different. Let me try to remember this. Pierre Menard, it's on the library, no?
Fictions.
Yeah. But it's not. Pierre Menard is not. I have to. Well, but Pierre Menard is not the story about the simulation.
Right.
Is it?
It's a story. It's a story about Pierre Menard who took it upon himself to translate the works of Saavedra, Don Quixote, into contemporary Spanish.
Yeah.
And he translates it. He doesn't translate it. He copies it word for word.
Yeah.
But because he's doing it in the 20th century, it adds something to it that was lacking before. Yeah. And when you talked about the messianic bringing into the future of Benjamin's idea of translation, it reminded me of the Borges story.
There are links, but no. The messianic is something else, because when the Messiah in sense of Benjamin, but he really did not follow it. I'm not sure if he believed it. But when Messias comes, we do not need any language anymore. So there is no translation. When Messias comes, we do not need any translation. This is the idea. It's the towers. Because we will exceed the language of God. This is in these. Well, no, this is too far. But if you follow in the philosophy language, which Benjamin knew quite well, from the so-called Adamitic language, which was the language within paradise, to the post-Adamitic language, which is the language once thrown out of paradise. Whereas, as in one of the theories, well, not one of them, only but in the, how to say this in English, essentials theories, you have the, in German you say Urteil. So you have the Urteil. Urteil is the judgment. And by naming, you have to judge. And once they were thrown out of paradise, they had to name, because the language of God was not there, which was the same as the language of things. So naming, judging, differentiating is in one language. But it's the birth of language. Yeah.
Just with respect to this Borgesian repetition of Don Quixote and Pierre Menard, I think maybe where a connection lies, because Deleuze discusses this very story in Difference and Repetition. Yeah. And he talks about it in reference to the history of philosophy, that when you repeat philosophy historically, you want to create a veritable double, which as its correlate creates an infinitely richer new thing, which has as its correlate the maximum distance between the two things. Yeah. The maximum distance between the two things. So that eventually you get within the original and in the reduplication, they're almost like one inside of the other. It's not fresh in my mind, so it's difficult to...
Well, this is like it does. I mean, you have this in the fold as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. We call this perplication. So the perplication, publication, I don't know how to say it in English, is the fold, are the folds within the folds. Yeah. And I mean, coming back to Roussel, it is what you have in those glass tubes, in fact, not as a fold, but as those reverberation, if we would speak about sound, or reduplications of one image, which doesn't originate anywhere. And the application is the term I think that Deleuze uses in the fold. But you're absolutely right. But this is contained within the moment of reproduction. This, yeah?
I had one other question with regard to the facsimile debate, just because I'm not familiar with it. I don't, so I sort of grasp what Panofsky's rebuttal was to the other art historians. But does it complicate it, or in this debate, were they referring to relics which were, the word is acera poetae, objects from the history of religious iconography, which are literally from the divine to the realm of the profane? No. Like the veil of Veronica or Shroud of Turin?
No. No, handmade by man.
Okay.
No.
Because it would complicate
this. Yeah. Well, or not, because we know that the relics are not, but they're just carrying through Mexico right now small. Apparently, it's the real blood of Papst, the Pope Paul, as a relict, since he's been sacred. No, really object. I mean, see, there, of course, Panofsky's main argument was you need photography for this alterity. You need the alterity in order to consider the original. So the distance, what you just said with Deleuze. And he said as well, and a very nice phrase in this essay, it was a great essay, said, well, and when the day comes that you will not be able to differentiate between the original and the reproduction anymore, art is dead. And then he makes a how do you call this in English? A minus.
Dash.
Yeah.
And dash.
We make, in German we say Gedankenstrich, which I like. You know, it's like a dash of the idea. He makes a dash and says, and it will not have died because of reproduction. Which is a good word to end now, I think. It's really sweet.
Does this, for anyone, like, bring up the question of the complaint in the Republic about the problem with painters making a painting that a bird would fly into because it can't tell the difference between the painting and the thing, and this question of fighting with this Republic idea of art as illusion, so real that it fools people in their seeking true from false. So this is
the classic, of course, allegory given for all mimetic, for all the mimesis. I think everybody always refers to this myth of I never can say the paradoxos, but who can say the two of them? You know, the competition.
Zeuxis and Paradoxios?
Yes.
Okay.
Somehow like this.
I'll take the.
Yeah. But I don't think that it's here. It is not the question of the true or the false.
But that seems like a possibly problematic, because that is one of the terms that seems really invisible in this discussion, is truth. And,
Yeah.
and it's funny that in those columns there's Hegel,
Yeah.
and then the, you know, in the reproduction,
Oh, with the
in the
glass.
translation, in the
Yeah.
reproduction, there's erasure
Yeah.
of this
Yeah.
juxtaposition, perhaps.
Yeah.
You know, and or foregrounding or backgrounding of truth, and so it almost is a presupposition that this consideration of truth be put behind you, and that this statement about when I say this, I'm already dead.
I'm already dead.
Yeah. So
No. Well, no.
the truth is.
No,
To
I'm
say
dead.
this is to have the truth behind you, and you have to turn. That means I have to be away from that. That has to be behind me. I have to leave that behind in order to make this statement, which is patently obvious. You know, if you can say I'm dead, you're not.
Yeah, well, this is the easy way to put it. Yeah, of course.
So, in a sense, this becomes the framework of a lie.
Yes, but this is not. I mean,
Or falsehood. It doesn't have to be a judgment in terms of that. I don't mean it in terms of a judgment, but just simply as as opposed to a truth. You know, a lie is one way to say it, but a falsehood is another.
Aristotle says the truth is found in poetics and art, so it was just it's a matter of opinion, because the illusion could be the truth and we're the falsehood, so the judgment there doesn't make sense.
Well, in this secondary phase with photography and reproduction, then that's a blurring. It becomes dimensional. that's a 2D kind of representation. And then now we're dealing with something that is more dimensional than that.
Yes, but I think I agree that at least not in this direction. The question of truth and I'm saying English lie or false, true or false, or véridique and false.
But just one little thing, because this becomes man ray. This becomes what
Yeah.
to create a surrealistic reality that is not true, but has its own narrative and open a new field of interpretation with multiple originals that are put together in ways that are not true.
Yeah, well, but I would not say are not true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna backing him up on this.
Yeah.
If you extend the Zeus Paradoxios competition, it was the first guy painted like trees that were so real that the birds wanted to land on it, right?
Yeah.
But the other guy painted. He had let's say a veil that he painted, and the other guy said, "Okay, now show me what you have." And the point is that the painting was the veil, and so it's not so much about what is rather the difference between the true thing and the false thing, but rather can we still perceive what is true in the, let's say, the illusion.
And I think
because
the third meaning becomes this re-situation of this in this retro.
This may be.
So like within the photograph or within any piece of art, like of course art is on some level fake or a reproduction of something. Like you paint a mountain or something, and it's a reproduction of that mountain. But
actually, that's a great example because it's not exactly true in the sense that painting becomes just as real as the mountain.
Yeah, well, no, it's something even more. Like there's a third, as you said, something.
Wait.
So that's all I have to say. Within this, let's say, the frame of illusion, the third or the truth or whatever can arise. So it's not a matter of articulating the difference between the original and the reproduction. So this quote that you said that art will die when you can't distinguish between the original and the reproduction. I don't think it means to say like, oh well, how do we get when we're unable to tell the difference between a painting of a mountain or a digital image of a mountain and the actual mountain. I don't think that's what's at stake. What's at stake is, can we still be able to tell the truth of the third thing within the digital frame? So
Digital film. Why digital?
No, digital or analog or a photograph.
The reproduction.
The reproduction.
Yes. So can we still see what he names himself and what we have learned by others in phenomenology, alterity?
Right. Alterity is generated by this
Separation.
Yeah.
Which also sort of puts art on the side of austerity. Because that's what's cool about that quote.
Only good art.
Yeah, maybe. But when at the end he says it won't be reproduction's fault. Right?
Yeah.
The same quote. It's almost like a call to arms for this is a new situation. What do we do now?
But isn't this where Baudrillard comes in?
Okay, now we go very fast. No. Before Baudrillard, in the 60s, since he was mentioned already, Deleuze made a book which is called Logique du Sens. Logique du Sens, of course. And the last chapter is a huge chapter on Plato, where he develops about the notion of simulacrum. Far before the good friend and wonderful guy Jean Baudrillard started his hypersimulation and his models. Baudrillard was just great, I think, but he really was not. And he really was great, but he was not how to say this now? After his, well, no, we come to the house. No, I don't want to say anything. Okay, I think perhaps the best is to, so you all get familiar with this, with Echo and Narcissus. Only so you read it afterwards. So you have to read it. Because I don't have the text with me. But the text is so dense, I think it's the second book within the Medium Metamorphosis. Second or seventh, I forgot. And the text is so dense and so well constructed.
But we're trying to figure out where we can get it. You're sending it to us, right?
Sorry?
You're emailing it to us? Or
No,
we can
the
look
book
it up?
you have to buy.
Okay. Okay.
You have to find it in that or whatever, but it's somewhere in some digital library.
Okay.
But no, it's good to have it. It's a great book. It's a great book. Because it's the whole Greek and Greco-Romano Latino mythology, which is the metamorphoses are the condensation of it. And so, in the myth of Echo and Narcissus starts with well, first Echo, and Echo. So Echo was a nymph, or is a nymph, because mythology is timeless, as we know. So she's still there. And Jupiter succeeded to convince Echo to be always at the Olymp when he's away, fooling around with some other nymphs. So he could speak to Juno, Echo, should speak to Juno to divert her. So she doesn't realize that Juno is going around, fooling and more somewhere else with some other nymphs. Up to one day where Juno discovers that there is a kind of contract of speech between Echo and her husband, Jupiter. And the content of this contract is that Echo has to divert or deviate by discourse the attention from Juno from the absence of Jupiter. So she does not realize his absence. And when Juno discovers this, she condemns Echo, not as one could imagine to have, all the tortures to have the tongue drawn out or rubbed up or cut up or whatever. But she condemns her to be mute, but in the case where others talk. And when others speak, she can only but repeat part of what she heard, or what is said. It's not said that she heard, but what is said. So she's condemned to repetition. But not only is she condemned to repetition, but she's condemned to a fragmentary repetition. So this is why I mentioned this Echo Park near London, 17 syllables, which was the longest ever constructed in the 18th century. So this was the penalty, or how you call it, of Echo. And on the other hand, you have Narcissus. And Narcissus is the son of a nymph as well, who was raped by the god of the flood of the river, in the river. So there, where time flows. And when the Sisiope, so is the name of the nymph, when she got, before she got the infant, Narcissus, she asked the blind, wise Tiresias what would be the fate of the coming son, Narcissus. And he answered, he was so I'll try to get this together. He was he was conceived in the flood of time, and he can survive as long as he remains a stranger to himself. He can survive as long as he remains a stranger to himself. So this is the story of Narcissus. Cheers. It goes on. Follow. And when Echo was condemned, she escaped into the woods and hid in the forest. So, this is me. She hid in the forest. And at a certain moment she heard somebody screaming or shouting, "Where am I?" And so she gave back, "Am I?" And the one who was shouting was Narcissus, because Narcissus was as well in the woods, the forest, but he lost his company and he was alone. So he shouted, "Where am I?" And Echo, like, as you say, an echo never answers its question, which is wrong, because Echo answers the question of Narcissus. Where am I? And Echo answers, "Am I?" Which is an answer, in fact. And then Narcissus is in a, how do you say all this, in a clearing, in a clearing. So Echo sees Narcissus and falls in love with Narcissus and is longing for him, and develops then a kind of dialogue, of course a false dialogue, between Narcissus looking where he is and where he can go to, and Echo answering him, and only fragments of the questions and that Narcissus is having. But since the answers and the questions of Narcissus, Echo starts to believe that her love towards Narcissus is recognized by him. So she gets out of the woods to meet him and to embrace him. And he violently rejects her and says, "Who are you?" She says again, "Are you?" So the play goes on. And then he gets away. And she is so deeply in sorrow and disillusion that she goes back into the woods, and as the wind rides, her soul goes into the stone. She disappears in the stones. And Narcissus goes on until he finds this pond, the water pond, you know? Pond. Not Ezra. Pond. The pond, and looks down, and as you know the story, and So he sees his image coming up, and he wants to reach it. Any time he wants to reach, it disappears. So remember, when appearance, disappearance, the same moment. And then his tears fall into the pond, and because he cannot reach the one he's longing for, which is himself. And then he gets so enraged that he starts hitting his breast violently. And from the stones around comes Echo's voice, and always related to what he says, and say, "Don't do this, this is not you." But he doesn't hear, and so he as you know, so violently touches his breast that he dies and collapses, not into the pond, but disappears. And then comes the flower and so on. So this is in fact the story of Echo and Narcissus. And going the same way as you mentioned that Barthes went this way to phenomenology and psychoanalysis. And within phenomenology, you would say then, as we said before briefly, that if you want to seize those two figures, Echo and Narcissus, and try to bring them by the narrative on a meta level, you would link Echo by her fate as somebody who has a reference to otherness without reference to self. So no self is constructed by otherness, but otherness is conceived. Whereas Narcissus, the exact contrary, or symmetry in the contrary, would have this relation to the self without having the relation to otherness. So the self is conceived, but not the otherness. And then you can go on and think, well, perhaps one is linked to space, which may be Echo, because by space, but there's no, as we know, reverberation of voice without space. This is how we know what echography means and what the echo means. And then the question is, does the other one, Narcissus, if Echo is the figure of space, may he be a figure of the image? Because where there is no otherness, there is no dimension. The only dimension is given by the self. And if the self, like Panofsky, once you cannot distinguish anymore, art is dead, and it's not died, it did not die by reproduction. So the question is, this in-between is not conceivable if there's no other dimension than the self. So this is a bit the figuration that Ovid in the Metamorphoses gives by those two myths of Narcissus and Echo, which I think are not less contemporary than they were 2,000 years ago, when Ovid wrote this, more or less. And then it brings us back to your question. Well, what does she do there? Echo. And how come? One thing is one could reflect long upon is why Echo has been so, how do you say this, deluded from psychoanalysis. Why the figure of Narcissus is so central. Of course, by Freud there are many answers to this, but how come that Echo, as being the figure of the voice, is not there at all in psychoanalysis? It's a question I myself cannot answer, I must say very clearly. But now linked to Benjamin, to the task of the translator. Well, we should, of course, have the text. We don't have text. This is a question, why does Benjamin link to echo? And I can give you the phrase once again. Which says, translation calls and penetrates the original in this unique place where the echo in its own language can resonate with a work in a foreign language. So this is what it says. So it means that again, somehow, echo seems only to be like bodiless, a transmitter of something.
Disembodied.
Huh?
Disembodied, would you use that?
Yeah, bodiless, disembodied, how you can say this in English. Yeah. So there is no, I have my ideas, but what do you think about this? Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that the different languages, and you can hear that when we're talking to each other, have different cultural connotations, and that may be some of the resonance that's going in between the languages, that you're picking up meaning from one language to another language, and the words don't always mean exactly the same thing when it comes around.
Even. Never.
Never. To say nothing about pattern and recognition and thesaurus in speech that is something else that doesn't translate well at all when you translate.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, if Benjamin says poetry, so to speak, as he says, plunged into the forest. So the language is in there, it's in the forest. And the echo seems to be in between. So it is, she's in the forest and outside, I may think, at the same time. But it says the echo in its own language can resonate with the work in a foreign language. So what would be the own language of echo?
Could it be voice without language?
Well, but he says own language.
Yes, I'm sure you can.
So he says language, Sprache, which is...
I don't know if anyone's familiar with the translation work of Steve Roden, the artist. He's based in California, and he's done these experiments of taking texts and then inventing translations as paintings in a way, with systems built in to create things. So maybe this is something that I can, put in, but in a sense, this becomes abstraction, but a particular type of abstraction, which is an echo of painting, like if you take Pollock, as a situation of choice or action, and then create a second echo, an echo for this, then this situation where that choice and action are suspended for system and false translation or invented translation that has no real connection to the original makes some kind of sense. And really, in a way, it's impossible to even though the two things look similar, even though they have similarities, they both use the same, in one, if you're just talking about echo, it's aural, but in this, it's medium. So, in that sense, they are the same, but what's lost in the translation is this fulfilled action that has a start and a finish.
Yeah, but here it is, I mean, imagine, we could imagine a very precise, like Baudelaire himself, like Benjamin himself. So, poems by Baudelaire, he's translating into German language. Like others did, Stefan Gerauke shortly before him and so on. So it's, first of all, it's language. It is language. So there is, as he says here, it's voice. Yes, we can consider voice, yeah, but it's language, and it's within the forest. So it's within the poetry. So let's say within language.
Poetry.
But so echo is resonating. The what?
The poetry.
Poetry. Yeah, poetry. So can resonate. So echo in its own language can resonate with the work in a foreign language. So yeah.
I don't know if I have it right, but I know. Okay, so I think everybody knows that Benjamin had as his the intention of had in mind that the intention of the translator should not be to convey meaning as closely as possible, but to allow the to translate the substrate of the language as closely as possible to the next language, because all languages are part of, in his mysticism, part of the same divine language that had been dissolved from the Tower of Babel, and they are all fragments. They're all incomplete fragments of this singular divine language of God, where all truth is hidden and so on.
Yeah.
So to me, it seems like it's not that you would want to convey the meaning of the echo in the next language that you're translating to, but rather the pure, not its like oral or phonic content, but something about just the words, just a repetition of what is everything except the meaning of what is being said. To me, that's the connection as far as I can draw it out right now.
Well, it depends what you consider by meaning. No. In German, Benjamin says he differentiated between the signification and the meaning. In German, it's called das Gemeinte. Das Gemeinte. So he's concentrating on das Gemeinte, on the meaning, in fact. But perhaps what you mean now, if you alter between signification and meaning, or structurally you could say between denotation and meaning, then it would be more the meaning, in fact, than denotation.
It's Gemeinte is more intention, maybe as well.
It is. There's always this difficulty with
Because it's passive.
intentional is not the word, because intentional would mean that there was a precise intention that we would have to rediscover or to read. But this would not be Benjamin, of course, or we would not say that the semantic of any text would be intentional. Trying to say then by discovering or dismantling the intention, the text is read, which is not the case, of course. So I mean, with Gemeinte, it is always brought into the future. And it can change, as you said, he said, this can change in relation to the total language, which is language of God. And it can, but it's not to refer to any original intention by the author. Although the reading we are having, of course, is always identifying with Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Baudelaire, Ezra Pound, or whoever. But we would not say that it is the intention of this or that author.
Maybe what is pointed at, or
It's what you can say in English, but what is pointed at, although pointed, although this is, as one says in the airports, subject to change. So it can change, of course. It can change. But I would like to know, what it's a question mark. How? I mean, if we analyze this sentence with the echo, it may come out that the echo is really just a figure that Benjamin is using, knowing that echo is the figure for the complete absence of any self-expression or expression of the self. So he could mean, for instance, like you say, intention, say, okay, the translator is not to have any expression of his or her self within the translation. Could be one, for instance. Huh?
I agree.
Yeah.
But I never. Sorry, just to finish up my thought.
Yeah.
So I think that makes perfect sense now. This echo within one's own language it relates not perfectly, but relates well back to the issue of the mountain and the reproduction of the artwork. So I have this example. You know how sometimes you'll see people walking around wearing like a shirt with like a Chinese or a Japanese character on it, and it'll say something like freedom or justice or honor, right? And so I was thinking, like, what if you would replace that letter with the American or English version, just said honor on the shirt? It wouldn't work the same way, right? People wouldn't get that same effect, which is of having like a tattoo in a different language. I think this is the otherness of a language, and I think when you translate something, I know it's kind of a cheesy example, but when you're a translator and you want to convert a work, it's about preserving that element, the inner alterity of it, right? Because what makes the Chinese character of honor different from honor itself? The fact that it's from another language. It evokes this sense of, like, ancient tradition, honor, heritage, all that stuff. It evokes that in the language, basically, because it's been imported to a new place. So it's like and one of the interesting things about the myth of Narcissus and Echo is that you said Echo, when she was punished, she melded with the stone, or like with the surroundings. And I think that's like saying that this alterity of within a specific language, it comes from the place you put the language in, let's say. So another example would be Duchamp's, urinal, right? Okay, so you have like a normal urinal, which is worth nothing at all in the bathroom, but you take it out and put it into an art gallery. Suddenly it's like the biggest thing ever, right? What changed there? The urinal itself is the same, but because you moved it to a different space, right? Suddenly it gains this alterity, which is similar to the Chinese, Chinese writing of honor. It's like the translator's job is to preserve that element of the text, that thing that makes it, evokes this. I think even Heidegger talks about it when discussing the painting with the boots.
Right.
Yes, like this let's say, spectrality of the work. And I think if we connect that to the fact that echo is not in any specific part of the language itself, but somehow in the space you put the language in, then I think